The clock on the kitchen wall read 11:42 when Martin came downstairs with his suitcase. I heard him before I saw him. The particular drag of that rolling bag across the hardwood floor at the top of the stairs, a sound I had heard 100 times before when he was leaving for a conference, or a fishing trip, or one of the dozen ordinary departures that make up a long marriage, but this time the sound was different. This time it was slower, deliberate, the way a person moves when they have rehearsed the moment and want to feel it fully as it arrives. I was standing at the kitchen island with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea I had made 40 minutes earlier and never touched. It had gone cold. I hadn't moved it. I just stood there in the quiet of our kitchen. The kitchen we had renovated together in 2009. The one with the pale green subway tile he had complained about and then admitted he loved. And I listened to my husband drag his suitcase down the stairs of our home for the last time. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I was not shaking. My hands were steady around that mug. My breathing was slow and even, and I think that steadiness surprised me more than anything else that night. Because there was a version of this moment I had imagined in the weeks before, lying awake in the dark on my side of the bed while Martin slept, where I would fall apart. Where the sight of that suitcase would crack something open in me that couldn't be closed again. I had prepared myself for that version. I had decided I would survive it regardless. But when the moment actually came, I didn't feel cracked open. I felt something much quieter than that, something that took me several days afterward to find the right word for. I felt ready. Martin appeared in the kitchen doorway at 11:44. He was dressed neatly, not in pajamas. Not in the clothes he'd worn that day, but in a fresh shirt, dark trousers, the kind of outfit a person puts on when they want to look composed for a difficult conversation. He had shaved. At 11:44 in the evening, after nearly 40 years of marriage, my husband had shaved before coming downstairs to leave me. I noticed that. I noticed everything that night. It was a professional habit I had never quite been able to turn off. And I was grateful for it then in a way I hadn't expected to be. He set the suitcase handle down so that it stood upright beside him, just inside the kitchen doorway, and he looked at me. That look. I have thought about that look many times since. It was not cold. It was not cruel in any obvious way. It was something more specific than either of those things. It was the look of a man who believes he is about to do something painful but necessary, and who has already decided, somewhere in the weeks or months before this moment, that his pain in delivering the news is comparable to the pain of receiving it. It was the look of a man who had rewritten the story of our marriage in his own mind until he was the protagonist of a tragedy rather than the author of a betrayal. There was pity in it, genuine pity, I think, which in some ways was worse than contempt would have been. His phone was on the counter to his left, face down. I had noticed that too when he set it there before going upstairs. The face-down placement. A small unconscious habit that I had cataloged along with everything else over the past 3 weeks. A man who places his phone face down is a man who does not want to see the screen light up in someone else's presence. A man who does that in his own kitchen at 11 o'clock at night in front of his wife of 40 years is a man who has been doing it for a long time and has stopped noticing that he does. Martin cleared his throat. "Eleanor," he said. "I think we both know this has been coming for a long time." That was the sentence. That one, right there. I think we both know this has been coming for a long time. Delivered in the careful, sorrowful tone of a man who genuinely believed it was true, who had constructed an entire interior narrative in which our marriage had been quietly dying for years, in which what he was doing tonight was not abandonment but honesty. Not theft but release, not betrayal but the inevitable conclusion of two people who had simply grown apart. I think we both know. He believed that. That was the part that took my breath away, not with grief, but with something closer to a cold, clarifying astonishment after everything I had found. After everything I had read and documented and sat alone with in this kitchen at 2 in the morning, with a legal pad and a cup of coffee gone cold, he stood there in his fresh shirt with his neat suitcase and his face-down phone, and he believed that I was about to be surprised. He thought he was delivering news. He thought this was going to go the way he had planned it. The way he and Diane had planned it, on a shared calendar I was never meant to see, with the entry titled so cleanly, so efficiently, So utterly without shame, M tells E midnight. Clean start. He thought I was going to cry, or plead, or stand there in stunned silence while he delivered the rest of the speech I could already see arranged behind his eyes. I had read enough divorce proceedings in my professional life to know what that speech sounded like. I had typed it up, filed it, organized it into manila folders with color-coded tabs more times than I could count. I knew every version of it. The gentle version and the cold version, and the version that tries to assign mutual blame. I could hear which version Martin had chosen. The gentle one, the one where he was sad about it, the one where he wished things were different. The one that was designed to make me feel that his leaving was something that had happened to both of them, rather than something he had chosen and planned, and financially prepared for over the course of 14 months. I let him get 3 sentences in. I want to be honest about that. I let him speak. Not because I needed to hear it, and not because I was uncertain about what I was going to do next, but because I had learned, in 38 years of sitting across from people in the worst moments of their lives, translating their pain into the language of legal documents, that there is information in the way a person lies when they believe they are not being caught, the specific words they choose, the things they emphasize, the things they skip over. Martin's 3 sentences told me exactly what version of events he intended to present if this became contested. I filed that information away in the same quiet, professional part of my mind that had been filing things away for 3 weeks. Then I reached under the kitchen island. I had placed the folder there earlier that evening. Not hidden, exactly. Just set on the lower shelf, in the spot where I usually kept the mail I hadn't dealt with yet, unremarkable. Invisible in its ordinariness. A plain manila folder, the same kind I had used every working day of my professional life. Inside it were documents I had spent 3 weeks gathering, organizing, and having reviewed by a family law attorney I had known for 2 decades. A woman named Patricia who had received my call with the kind of quiet, focused attention that told me she understood immediately that this was not a panicked first phone call, that I was not calling her in shock, that I had already thought this through. I set the folder on the kitchen island. I slid it across the pale green tile, the tile Martin had complained about and then admitted he loved, toward the hand that was resting on the counter beside his face-down phone, and I said, in a voice that came out steadier than I had any right to expect, "Before you finish that sentence, you should probably look at what's in there." Martin stopped. The kitchen was very quiet. The clock on the wall read 11:47. Outside, the neighborhood was completely still. No cars, no wind, just the particular dense silence of late night in a house where something enormous is happening. Martin looked at the folder. He looked at me. And in the 2 or 3 seconds before he reached for it, before everything that was about to happen began, I saw it. The first flicker of something that was not pity, and was not sorrow, and was not the composed sadness of a man delivering necessary news. Something that moved behind his eyes like weather changing at the edge of a horizon, he had no idea. After 14 months and $94,000 and a shared calendar entry and a plan so carefully constructed that he had shaved before coming downstairs to execute it, he had absolutely no idea what was in that folder. And that was when I finally understood what the word was. The word for what I had been feeling since he appeared in the kitchen doorway with his neat suitcase and his rehearsed eyes. Not anger, not grief, not even relief, exactly ridity. I had been ready for this for 3 weeks, and he had only just realized in this moment, looking at a plain manila folder on a pale green tile countertop at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, that he was not. Before I go back to the beginning, and I need to go back to the beginning, because that moment at the kitchen island only means what it means if you understand everything that came before it, I want to say a few things directly to you. The names in this story are not the real names. Martin is not his name. Diane is not her name. Some of the details have been changed enough to protect the people involved, including myself. What has not been changed is the shape of it, the pattern of it, the slow, specific way it happened, and the slower, more specific way I chose to respond. That part is true in every detail that matters. I'm not telling you this for revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I know how a story like this can sound from the outside. I'm telling it because I spent a long time feeling like I was disappearing inside my own life, quietly, politely, in a way that no one around me seemed to notice or name, and I have come to believe that there is something important in saying out loud, I noticed, I handled it, and I am still here. If you are watching this and something in those first few minutes felt familiar, not the specific facts, but the feeling underneath them, the particular experience of being in a room with someone who has already decided what you are capable of, and being quietly absolutely certain that they are wrong, then this story is for you. I'm glad you're here. And before we go any further, I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. Drop your city or your country in the comments. I want to know who's sitting with me in this. My name is Eleanor Price, and before I retired 4 years ago, I spent 38 years working as a family court paralegal in a mid-sized firm that specialized in divorce proceedings. I'm telling you that first because it matters to everything that comes after. For nearly 4 decades, my job was to take the worst moments of people's lives and translate them into the language of legal documents. I read depositions. I organized financial disclosures. I sat in on settlement conferences where people who had once promised each other forever now negotiated who got the kitchen table and who got the dog. I processed thousands of filings, maybe tens of thousands. I stopped counting after the first decade, and I learned to recognize certain patterns, certain phrases that show up when someone is telling the truth, and certain other phrases that show up when they are not. You develop an ear for it after a while. The grammar of deception. It has a particular shape. People who are lying in legal documents tend to over-explain things that don't need explaining, and they skip very quickly over things that do. They use the passive voice. They create distance between themselves and their actions. They say things like mistakes were made and the marriage had deteriorated, instead of I made a mistake or I left. I got very good at reading that language. It made me good at my job. It also meant that I spent 38 years sitting across from women, and sometimes men, but mostly women, who were only just beginning to realize that the person they had trusted most in the world had been lying to them in ways that were now being carefully documented in 12-point Times New Roman font with exhibits labeled A through L. I never thought I would become one of them, but before I tell you how that happened, I need to tell you what came before. Because the betrayal only means what it means if you understand what was betrayed. I met Martin in 1982. I was 26. He was 28. We were both young in the way people were young then. Not naive, exactly, but still operating on the premise that life was fundamentally fair, that good intentions mattered. That if you worked hard and treated people decently, the universe would more or less meet you halfway. We met at a friend's wedding. He asked me to dance during a song I can no longer remember. And I said yes for reasons I also can no longer remember, and by the end of the evening we were sitting on the steps outside the venue, talking about things I don't think either of us had planned to talk about. Real things. The kind of conversation you have when you are 26 and 28 and you meet someone who feels, for reasons you can't quite explain, like they are listening to the actual person you are rather than the person you have been performing. We were married 14 months later. The early years were good. I don't say that with bitterness or revision. They were genuinely, uncomplicatedly good. We were broke in the way young couples are broke, living in a too-small apartment with furniture we had assembled ourselves, splitting a single dessert at the diner on Friday nights because that was what the budget allowed. But we were happy. Martin worked in logistics for a shipping company. I was just starting at the law firm. We had a plan. We were going to save for a house. We were going to wait a few years before we had kids. We were going to do everything in the right order, carefully, the way responsible people do. And then I got pregnant, not with one baby. With 3, the triplets were born in October of 1986. 2 daughters and a son, delivered at 34 weeks. Each of them small enough to hold in one hand but healthy, breathing, impossibly and completely ours. Renata came first, then Michael, 2 minutes later, then Sophie, 4 minutes after that. We had not planned for 3. We had barely planned for 1. The apartment we were living in had a single bedroom. We owned a crib that a friend had given us, singular. 1 crib. I remember standing in the hospital room the day after they were born, looking at the 3 plastic bassinets lined up beside my bed and thinking with a clarity that was almost funny. We have no idea what we are doing, but we figured it out. You do when you have to. Martin took a second job for a while. Weekend shifts at a warehouse, and I went back to work after 12 weeks with all three of them in daycare and a pumping schedule I had color-coded on a calendar that I kept in my purse. It was hard. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't hard. There were years in there that are blurred in my memory into a single continuous experience of not enough sleep and too much laundry, and the very specific fear that we were doing everything wrong and somehow damaging all three of them in ways we wouldn't understand until they were adults in therapy. But we did it together. That part was real. Martin was a good father in those years. He was present. He got up in the middle of the night. He learned to hold two babies at once while I fed the third. He sat on the floor and built block towers that Michael would knock down over and over, laughing every single time. He braided Sophie's hair before school. He taught Renata to ride a bike. We bought the house when the triplets were 7. It wasn't much. A 3-bedroom ranch on the edge of town, built in the 70s, with countertops we hated and a backyard that was mostly dirt. But it was ours. We painted every room ourselves. Martin refinished the hardwood floors. I planted a garden that died the first summer and came back stronger the second. The triplets shared 2 bedrooms for years until we saved enough to convert the attic into a third. We had birthday parties in that backyard. We had Thanksgivings in that kitchen. We hung school photos on the walls in frames that didn't match because we bought them one at a time as we could afford them. It was a real life. I need you to understand that. For the first 20 years, maybe longer, it was a real marriage. Not perfect. We fought sometimes. We got tired of each other sometimes. There were years when we were more like roommates managing a household than partners in love. But it was real. I believed in it. I think Martin did too, for a long time. And running alongside that entire life from almost the very beginning was Diane. I met Diane in 1991. At a neighborhood association meeting I had only attended because Martin was out of town and I needed an excuse to leave the house after 5 straight days alone with 3 4-year-olds. She was sitting in the back row with a notebook she never opened, and halfway through a very boring presentation about zoning permits, she leaned over and whispered, "If this goes on for 10 more minutes, I'm going to fake a medical emergency. Do you want to be my witness?" I laughed so hard I had to leave the room. She followed me out. We went to a diner and talked for 2 hours. By the end of the night, I had her phone number written on a napkin in my purse. And a feeling I hadn't had since college, the specific surprised relief of meeting someone who might actually become a friend. She did. For 32 years, Diane was my best friend. The kind of friend who knows what you are going to say before you finish the sentence. The kind you call first. Before your sister, before your mother, sometimes before your husband. We had standing Sunday phone calls that lasted an hour, sometimes 2. We had a tradition where we took each other out for our birthdays, just the 2 of us, no husbands, no kids, dinner somewhere we didn't have to cook or clean up after. She was at the hospital the night my father died. I was at her house the weekend her son left for college, and she cried so hard she couldn't breathe. We knew each other's kitchen layouts, each other's coffee orders, each other's fears in the specific language we had each used to name them. When the triplets came home from the hospital, when they were finally, after 6 weeks in the NICU, cleared to leave, and we brought all 3 of them home to that tiny apartment with the single crib, Diane was the first person to visit. She brought food, which I barely remember, and a ceramic bluebird figurine, which I have never forgotten. It was small, the size of my palm, glazed in shades of blue that shifted depending on the light. Delicate, but not fragile. She handed it to me while I was sitting on the couch with Renata asleep on my chest. And she said, "For luck. And because you're going to need something beautiful to look at, on the days when everything else feels impossible." I put it on the kitchen windowsill that afternoon. It has lived there ever since. Through 5 different sets of curtains, through the move from the apartment to the house, through the kitchen renovation in 2009, when we tore out the old counters and put in the pale green subway tile, and I packed up everything on that windowsill except the bluebird, which I carried in my hand to the new window and set down first before anything else. Every time I washed dishes, I saw it. Every morning when I made coffee, it was there. It became part of the landscape of my life in the way that small objects do when they sit in the same place long enough, invisible most of the time, but steadying when you noticed it. A reminder of the person who had given it to me, the friendship it represented, Deanne knew Martin almost as long as I did. She and her husband Joel were at our wedding. We went on vacations together, back when the kids were young. Long weekends at a lake cabin, where the adults took turns managing the chaos, and the evenings were warm and full of laughter that felt easy in the way things feel easy when you are still young enough to believe they will stay that way. Joel was quiet, thoughtful, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. Diane was bright and sharp and funny. The four of us fit together. Or I thought we did. 18 months ago, if you had asked me to describe my life, I would have told you it was good. The triplets were grown. Renata married with 2 children of her own. Michael engaged. Sophie building a career in another state but still close, still calling every week. Martin and I were talking about retirement. We had paid off the house. We had started planning a trip to Ireland, something we had always said we would do someday, and someday had finally started to feel like it might actually arrive. Diane and I still had our Sunday phone calls. The Bluebird was still on the windowsill. I was 67 years old. I had been married for 40 years. I thought I knew what the rest of my life looked like. I was wrong. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Approximately 18 months ago, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, going through our quarterly financial review. This was a habit I had maintained since the early years of our marriage, back when we were young and broke and every dollar had a specific job to do. Even after Martin's career progressed and money became less tight, I kept doing it. 4 times a year, usually at the end of each quarter, I would log into our accounts, review the statements, compare them against our budget, and make sure everything was where it was supposed to be. Martin knew I did this. It was not a secret. We had joint accounts, checking and savings both, and we had always operated on the premise that marriage meant financial transparency. In 40 years, it had never been an issue. I opened the savings account statement first. The balance was lower than I expected, not dramatically lower, not in a way that set off alarm bells, just lower by about $3,000. Compared to where I had projected, it would be based on our automatic deposits and our typical spending patterns. I frowned at the screen. I scrolled down through the transaction history. There were withdrawals. 4 of them, spread across the previous 3 months, each one for $750. Even amounts. Consistent. Spaced roughly 3 weeks apart, I sat with that for a moment. $750 is not a small amount of money. But it's also not large enough to trigger automatic alerts or require secondary authorization on most joint accounts. It sits in a particular range, noticeable if you are looking, invisible if you are not. I had spent enough years reviewing financial disclosures in divorce cases to recognize that range. It is the amount people withdraw when they are trying to move money without being obvious about it, but I did not jump to that conclusion. Not yet. That is not how I am built, professionally or personally. The first document is never the whole case. You sit with the information. You look for explanations. You do not react until you have enough data points to form a pattern. I checked the memo line on each withdrawal blank. All 4 of them. I checked the dates against our shared calendar, the one Martin and I both used to track appointments and events and trips. Nothing. No travel. No large purchases I could remember, no home repairs or medical bills or any of the usual explanations for unplanned expenses. I made a note on the legal pad I kept in the kitchen drawer. 4 withdrawals, $750 each, no memo. No corresponding calendar entry. Then I closed the laptop and made dinner. When Martin came home that evening, I asked him, casually, while we were eating, if he remembered what we had spent $3,000 on in the last quarter. He looked up from his plate. There was no hesitation, no visible discomfort. He said, $3,000? I don't think we did. Why? I explained that the savings account balance was a little lower than I had expected. I asked if maybe he had withdrawn cash for something and forgotten to mention it. He shook his head. He said he would look into it. He said it was probably just an error in my math, or maybe I had forgotten about something. He said it gently. Kindly. The way you speak to someone you love who has made a small, understandable mistake. I did not argue. I said that was probably it. I let it drop, but I had not made a mistake. I knew that the same way I knew my own name. And Martin's explanation, casual, unbothered, gently deflecting, was the kind of explanation I had read in 1,000 depositions from people who were lying, but not yet worried about being caught. I made a second note on the legal pad that night after Martin had gone to bed, no hesitation when asked. Attributed discrepancy to my error, then I put the legal pad back in the drawer and went to sleep. The second crack appeared 5 weeks later. Martin told me at breakfast on a Sunday morning in April that he was joining an investment group. A few men from his old workplace, he said, who were getting together once a month to talk about retirement planning and portfolio strategy. He said it casually, the way you mention a new hobby or a book club. He said the meetings were going to be on Sunday evenings, which was slightly inconvenient, but it was the only time everyone could make it work. Sunday evenings. I kept my face neutral. I said that sounded interesting. I asked who was in the group. He named 3 men. I recognized 2 of the names vaguely. Former colleagues he had mentioned over the years but never spent time with socially. The third name I did not recognize at all. I asked where they were meeting. He said they were rotating houses. This month it was at Dave's place, he thought, or maybe John's. He wasn't sure. He would check. There was nothing obviously wrong with any of this. Men join investment groups. Retirement planning is a reasonable thing for a man in his late 60s to be thinking about. Sunday evenings are inconvenient but not impossible, but Martin had never, in 40 years of marriage, expressed interest in an investment group. He had never been the kind of man who sought out financial strategy conversations. We had a financial advisor we met with once a year. Martin's approach to retirement planning had always been to nod along during those meetings and let me ask the detailed questions. This new interest, sudden, specific, scheduled, did not fit the pattern of the man I knew. And Sunday evenings were when I talked to Diane. For 32 years, Diane and I had our standing phone call on Sunday evenings. 7 o'clock almost every week unless one of us was traveling or sick. It was the rhythm of our friendship. It was as much a part of my weekly routine as church or groceries. That first Sunday in April, when Martin left for his investment group at 6:30, I called Diane at 7 as usual. It went to voicemail. I left a message. I said I hoped everything was okay. I said to call me back when she had a chance. She did not call back that night. She texted the next morning. Sorry, was out with Joel, lost track of time, let's catch up next week. It was a perfectly reasonable explanation. People miss phone calls. Life happens, but Diane had not missed a Sunday call in over a year. And the text, brief, breezy, no details, was not the way Diane usually communicated with me. She was a talker. She over-explained. She would normally have called instead of texted, or at the very least sent a longer message with an actual story about where she had been and what she had been doing. I added a line to the legal pad. Investment group, Sunday evenings. Missed call, uncharacteristic text. The third crack was linguistic. It happened in early May, during a conversation I can no longer remember the context of. Martin and I were talking in the kitchen, something mundane, something about scheduling or errands or plans for the weekend. And he said a phrase I had heard 1,000 times before, but never from him. That works for me. But whatever you think is best. I'm flexible on it. That phrase. Those exact words in that exact construction, it was Diane's phrase. A verbal tic she had used for as long as I had known her. A particular way of expressing openness to options that I had always found slightly charming, because it was so distinctly hers. I had heard her say it in restaurants when we were deciding what to order. I had heard her say it on the phone when we were making plans. I'm flexible on it. Always with that slight emphasis on the word flexible, as though she were offering a gift. I had never, in 40 years, heard Martin say it. People pick up phrases from each other, it happens. Spouses start to sound alike after decades together. It is normal, unremarkable, but this phrase did not come from me. I did not say it, I had never said it. Which meant Martin had learned it from someone else. The recognition landed in my chest before my brain fully caught up. A physical sensation, like a small cold stone dropping into water. I did not react visibly. I continued the conversation. I said something about the weekend plans. I agreed to whatever we had been discussing, but inside, in the part of my mind that had spent 38 years cataloging the small wrong details in other people's legal statements, something clicked. I added a third line to the legal pad that night, using Dee's phrase. No prior pattern, the fourth crack was the simplest, and in some ways the worst. It was a Saturday in late May. I was taking the recycling out to the bins in the garage. A chore I did every weekend, the same way I had done every weekend for years, and I saw a piece of paper at the bottom of the bin that had not been folded or torn, just placed there whole. I would not have noticed it, except that it had a logo printed at the top. A hotel logo. I pulled it out. It was a receipt. The Monterey Hotel downtown. A room for one night, checked in on a Thursday 2 weeks prior. Charged to Martin's credit card, the one he used for work expenses and personal purchases that he paid off every month from our joint checking account. The total was $220. A single king room. No additional charges. I stood in the garage holding that receipt for what felt like a long time but was probably only 30 seconds. Martin had not told me he stayed at a hotel 2 weeks ago. There had been no business trip. No reason I could think of for him to need a hotel room 20 minutes from our house. I could have asked him. That would have been the normal thing to do, the reasonable thing. I could have walked back inside and said, "I found this receipt. What was this for?" And he would have given me an explanation, and I would have decided whether or not I believed it. But I did not do that, because the receipt's naughty had not been hidden. It had been placed in the recycling bin, not torn up. Not shoved to the bottom, not obscured in any way. It had been discarded the way a person discards something they do not expect anyone to look at. The way a person discards things when they have stopped worrying about being caught. And that told me something more important than anything Martin might say if I asked him about it. It told me that he no longer believed I was paying attention. I took a photo of the receipt with my phone. I put the receipt back in the recycling bin exactly where I had found it. Then I went back inside and made lunch. That night, I sat at the kitchen table after Martin had gone to bed, and I opened the legal pad. 4 entries. 4 separate anomalies spread across 3 months. Individually, each one had an innocent explanation. Accounting error, missed phone call, borrowed phrase, forgotten hotel stay, but together they formed a pattern. I have told you that I spent 38 years learning to recognize the grammar of deception. I learned it in depositions and financial disclosures and settlement conferences. I learned it in the particular way people construct sentences when they are trying to create distance between themselves and the truth. I learned to see the shape of a lie before I could always name what the lie was about. This had a shape. I did not know yet what the shape was. I did not know if it was an affair, or financial betrayal, or something else entirely. I did not have enough information to say for certain what Martin was doing, or with whom, or why. But I knew, the way I had known 1,000 times before, sitting across from a client who was only just beginning to understand what their spouse had been hiding, that something was being hidden. And I knew that I was not going to confront him about it. Not yet, because the first document is never the whole case. You do not walk into court with 4 anomalies and a suspicion. You do not accuse someone of betrayal when they can still destroy the evidence or construct a better lie. You sit with the information. You gather more. You wait until you have enough that the truth cannot be denied, reframed, or explained away. I had spent my entire professional life teaching people that lesson, sitting across from women who had confronted too early and lost everything because of it. I was not going to make that mistake. I closed the legal pad. I put it back in the drawer underneath the stack of takeout menus and expired coupons and all the other unremarkable paper debris of a long marriage, and I decided that I was going to start paying closer attention. The discovery came on a Thursday evening in June, 3 months after I had started keeping the legal pad. Martin left for his investment group at 6:30. He called out goodbye from the front hall the same way he always did. I heard the door close. I heard his car start in the driveway. I stood at the kitchen sink with my hands in warm dishwater, and I watched through the window as his headlights swept across the garage door and disappeared down the street. Then I dried my hands and went to the small office we kept off the living room. I want to be clear about what I was doing and why. I was not snooping. Or perhaps I was, but not in the way that word usually suggests. Not frantically. Not desperately, not tearing through drawers, looking for evidence I only suspected might exist. I was looking methodically, carefully. The way I had learned to look at documents in my professional life, with the understanding that the truth is usually not hidden in locked drawers or secret files, but sitting in plain sight in places people stop believing anyone is paying attention to. We had a shared desktop computer in the office. An older machine we had bought years ago and never bothered to replace because it still worked fine for the things we used it for: email, online banking, looking up recipes, the occasional video call with the grandchildren. Both of us used it. Both of us had separate email accounts and separate logins, but we each knew the other's passwords. There had never been a reason not to. I sat down at the desk and moved the mouse to wake the screen. The computer was still logged in. Not to my account. To Martin's. He had left his email open. I stared at the screen for a moment. This was not normal. Martin was not careless with this kind of thing. He logged out. He closed browsers. He had done it automatically for as long as we had owned a computer, the same way he locked the front door when he left the house or turned off lights when he left a room, except now apparently he did not. Because he no longer believed he needed to, my hands were very still on the desk. I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. I could hear my own breathing. I moved the cursor to the email inbox and I clicked. The most recent email was from Diane. The subject line was blank. The timestamp said it had been sent 40 minutes ago, right before Martin left for his investment group. I opened it. The email itself was short. 3 lines: drive safe. I'll be thinking about you all night. Only 3 more weeks, and we don't have to do this anymore. 3 more weeks. I scrolled down. The email was part of a thread, a long one. I clicked to expand the full conversation. There were dozens of messages, months of them, stretching back to April of the previous year. 14 months, I began to read. I do not think I can describe to you what it feels like to read a conversation like that. Not the anger, which came later, and not even the grief, which also came later. What I felt in the moment was something stranger and more dislocating. It was the experience of discovering that 2 people you thought you knew had entire lives you had never seen. Entire selves, an entire language they spoke only to each other. Full of references and inside jokes and endearments that had been constructed in secret over more than a year while I made dinner and folded laundry and sat on the couch next to one of them watching television. The early emails were careful. Tentative. Diane had sent the first one. It was dated April 19th of the previous year, and it was framed as a check-in after a conversation they'd apparently had in person. She said she had been thinking about what he said. She said she felt the same way, but she was scared. She said she didn't know what to do. Martin's response, 2 days later, was longer. He said he was scared too. He said he had been unhappy for a long time, longer than he had wanted to admit. He said being with her felt like waking up after years of sleepwalking. He said he didn't want to hurt anyone, especially not me, but he couldn't keep pretending. The emails after that grew warmer, less careful. There were messages sent late at night, long rambling confessions about feelings and regrets, and the specific ways they had each felt lonely in their marriages. There were shorter messages sent during the day. Miss you, thinking about you. Can't wait to see you Sunday. There were messages that were explicit in ways I will not repeat here, not because I am ashamed, but because they are not necessary for you to understand what I understood in that moment. This was not a fling. It was not a mistake. It was not even a midlife crisis in the shallow, cliched sense of that phrase. It was a relationship, a real one, developed over more than a year, with depth and detail and an emotional architecture that had been carefully built in the spaces I was not looking. Martin loved her, or believed he did, which in practical terms amounted to the same thing. And Diane, my best friend of 32 years, the woman who had brought me a ceramic bluebird the day my children came home from the hospital, the woman I had called first on the night my father died, loved him back. I sat at the desk and I read the entire thread, every message. I did not skim, I did not look away. I read it the way I had read 1,000 depositions in my career, carefully, professionally, cataloging facts. 14 months. The affair had begun in April of the previous year, which meant it had been going on for more than a third of the time I had been keeping the legal pad. I had not been wrong. The cracks I had noticed were real. I had simply been 3 months behind. The investment group did not exist. The Sunday evening meetings were when Martin and Diane met, usually at the hotel downtown, the Monterey, the one whose receipt I had found in the recycling bin. Diane's marriage was also ending, according to the emails. She had not told Joel yet. She was waiting. She and Martin were both waiting, they said, for the right time. They were trying to be responsible about it. They were trying not to blow up their lives all at once. They had a plan. I scrolled further down in the thread, past the long confessional messages, past the logistical ones about where to meet and when, past the explicit ones. And I found what I had been looking for without knowing I was looking for it. An attachment. The email containing the attachment was from 2 months ago. Diane had sent it. The message itself said only, "Talk to Richard like you asked." He sent this over. "Let me know what you think." I clicked the attachment. It was a PDF, a financial document, 6 pages long. The header at the top read, * confidential asset restructuring proposal, Martin Price. The name at the bottom, in a neat digital signature, was Richard Halloran, certified financial planner. I did not recognize the name. I began to read. The document was technical, but I had read enough financial disclosures in my career to understand it. It was a strategy, a plan for how Martin could move money out of jointly titled accounts, the savings account, the checking account, the investment portfolio we had built together over 40 years, and into new accounts titled only in his name, in a way that would minimize tax consequences and avoid triggering automatic alerts or requiring my authorization. The proposal recommended withdrawals in amounts under $1,000, spaced irregularly over time. It recommended opening a new high-yield savings account at a different bank, one I did not have login access to. It recommended transferring portions of our joint investment portfolio into a rollover IRA in Martin's name only. A move that could be framed as routine retirement planning if anyone asked. There was a timeline. The restructuring had already begun according to the proposal 4 months prior. The goal was to have the majority of liquid assets moved within 6 months. 6 months from 2 months ago, which meant 4 months from now. I looked at the date on the proposal again. Then I looked at the current date, 4 months. My hands were still resting on the desk. I noticed distantly that they were shaking now, just slightly. A fine tremor I could see but not feel. I closed the PDF. I went back to the email thread. I scrolled down further, past the attachment, past more logistical messages about money and timing and who would tell whom and when. Past messages where they reassured each other that this was the right thing, that they deserved to be happy, that Eleanor and Joel would be fine eventually. That people got divorced all the time and survived. Eleanor and Joel, that was how they referred to us. Our names in their private emails to each other, not my wife or her husband, just Eleanor, just Joel. As though we were distant acquaintances. Logistical problems to be managed. I kept scrolling, and then I saw it. At the very bottom of the thread, in an email sent 3 days ago, there was a line I almost missed. Deanne had written. Added it to the shared calendar. June 30th, midnight. M tells E clean start. We're really doing this shared calendar. I minimized the email window. I opened Martin's calendar application. It took me a moment to find it. Because I did not use the calendar app on the computer, I used the one on my phone, and Martin had always done the same, or so I thought. But there it was. A desktop calendar application synced to an account I did not recognize. I clicked on June. I scrolled down to the 30th. There was an entry at 11 p.m. The title was exactly what Diane had written. *M tells E midnight, clean start. It was color-coded green. There was a note attached. I clicked to expand it. The note said, E in bed by 11, M downstairs by 11:30, bag already packed in car, calm, kind, quick. Do not engage if she gets emotional. Do not let her drag it out the door by midnight. D waiting at Monterey. Room 512. I read the note 3 times. Then I looked at the date, June 30th. I looked at today's date in the corner of the screen. June 9th, 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, on a night he had already chosen, at a time he had already decided. Martin was going to come downstairs with a suitcase he had already packed, and he was going to tell me he was leaving. He was going to do it at midnight, because I would be tired, off balance, less able to argue. He was going to keep it calm and kind and quick. He was not going to engage if I got emotional. He was not going to let me drag it out. He was going to be out the door by midnight, where Diane would be waiting for him in room 512 at the Monterey Hotel, the same hotel where they had been meeting every Sunday for over a year, and they were going to begin their clean start together. While I, Eleanor, the logistical problem, the woman who would be fine eventually, because people got divorced all the time and survived, sat alone in the house we had lived in for 30 years, in the marriage I had believed was real. with no warning and no preparation and no say in the timeline of my own life. I closed the calendar, I closed the email. I sat at the desk and I did not move. The clock in the kitchen ticked. The house was completely silent. Outside, the street was dark. I could see my reflection in the window of the office, a woman sitting very still at a desk, her hands folded in front of her, her face unreadable. I do not know how long I sat there before I thought to check the time. When I finally looked at the clock on the computer screen, 11 minutes had passed. I had sat completely still for 11 minutes. I know that because I noticed the timestamp when I first opened Martin's email, 6:47 p.m. And when I looked again, it was 6:58 p.m., 11 minutes. It felt longer. It also felt shorter. It felt like no time at all and like the longest 11 minutes of my life. I took a breath, then I stood up. I moved the mouse and closed every window I had opened in reverse order. Calendar first, then email, then browser. I logged out of Martin's account. I put the computer to sleep. I pushed the chair back under the desk exactly as I had found it. Then I walked to the kitchen. The legal pad I had been keeping for 3 months was in the drawer under the takeout menus. I took it out. I looked at the entries I had made, the withdrawals, the investment group, the linguistic tick, the hotel receipt. 4 anomalies that had become a pattern. The pattern now had a name, a shape, a timeline. I set the old legal pad on the counter. Then I opened the drawer again and took out a fresh one. I sat down at the kitchen table. I picked up a pen at the top of the first page, in the same neat handwriting I had used to annotate 10,000 legal documents over 38 years. I wrote Martin Price, Diane Kowalski, evidence log, June 9. And underneath that, I began to write. I need to tell you why I did not confront Martin that night, why I did not wait up for him when he came home from the investment group that was not an investment group, why I did not walk into the bedroom and turn on the light and tell him I knew, why I did not call Diane, why I did not scream or cry or throw his belongings onto the lawn or do any of the things that a different version of myself, a younger version maybe, or a version who had not spent 38 years watching other people's marriages end in court, might have done. I did not confront him because I knew better. That is the simplest answer. I knew better. I had sat across from hundreds of women, and some men, but mostly women, in the worst weeks of their lives, and I had watched them make the same mistake over and over again. They found out. They confronted immediately. And in confronting, they lost. They lost because confrontation gives the other person time to prepare, time to move money, time to delete emails, time to construct a better story, time to call a lawyer before you do, time to get to the bank first, to the financial advisor first, to the narrative first. Confrontation feels necessary in the moment. It feels like the only honest response to dishonesty. It feels like self-respect. But in a divorce, and I knew, sitting at that kitchen table at 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening in June, that this was going to be a divorce. Confrontation before documentation is not honesty. It is strategy. Bad strategy. I was not going to make that mistake. I had 3 weeks. Martin had given me that inadvertently by putting the date in a shared calendar he did not know I could see. 3 weeks before he planned to tell me at midnight with a packed bag and a script designed to get him out the door before I could respond. 3 weeks was enough, not enough to stop feeling the way I felt, which was a complicated, layered kind of pain I did not have time to sit with yet, but enough to do what needed to be done. I stayed up until Martin came home that night, not waiting in the kitchen where he would see me and know something was wrong, but upstairs in bed with a book I was not reading, the lamp on, everything normal. He came in a little after 10. I heard him moving around downstairs for a few minutes, keys on the counter, the refrigerator opening and closing, the particular rhythm of his evening routine. Then he came upstairs. He opened the bedroom door and smiled when he saw me awake. "Good book?" he asked. I looked up. I smiled back. I said it was fine, nothing special. He asked if I wanted tea. I said no, I was about to go to sleep. He kissed me on the forehead, the same way he had kissed me on 1,000 nights before, a habit, a gesture so worn in by repetition that it required no thought and carried no meaning. Then he went into the bathroom and closed the door, and I lay there in the bed we had shared for 40 years, and I listened to the sound of running water, and I did not move. I fell asleep sometime after 11. I do not remember deciding to sleep. I only remember waking up the next morning with sunlight coming through the window and Martin already gone. He had an early meeting, according to the note he left on the kitchen counter. And the house quiet around me. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. And then I called my daughter. Renata is the oldest of the triplets by 4 minutes. She came first, and she has moved through the world ever since with the particular competence of a person who has never not been responsible for something. She is a lawyer herself now, corporate litigation. Married with 2 children and a life that is busy and ordered and methodical in ways that remind me of myself at her age. Of the 3 of them, Renata, Michael, Sophie, she was the one I needed to call first, not because I loved her more. I need to say that clearly. I love all 3 of my children with a ferocity that has not dimmed even slightly in the nearly 40 years since they were born. But Renata was the one I could tell this to and trust that she would not react. Would not call her father, would not try to fix it or intervene, or do any of the things that love makes people want to do before strategy says they should. Renata would understand that this required a plan. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was bright, busy, mid-morning energy. "Hi, Mom. Everything okay?" I said. "I need to talk to you about something. Are you somewhere private?" There was a pause, half a second, maybe less, but I heard the shift in it, the recalibration. She said, "Hold on." I heard movement, a door closing. Then her voice again, quieter now. "Okay, I'm in my office. What's wrong?" I told her, not everything, not the emails in full, not the detailed content of the affair. Not the specific cruelty of reading my name and Joel's name written like logistical obstacles in someone else's love story. I told her what she needed to know in order to help me. I told her the facts. Your father is having an affair with Diane. It has been going on for 14 months. He has been moving money out of our joint accounts with the help of a financial advisor I have never heard of. He is planning to tell me he is leaving on June 30th at midnight. He does not know that I know. I said it all in less than 2 minutes, clear, declarative sentences. No emotion in my voice, or at least none that I let her hear. When I finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then Renata said, very quietly, "Mom." Just that. Just my name. I closed my eyes. I said, "I need you to listen to me now, and I need you not to argue." She said, "Okay." I said, "I am not going to confront him. Not yet. I am going to spend the next 3 weeks gathering documentation and building a case, and I am going to file before he does. But I need help. I need the name of the best family law attorney you know. And I need you to promise me that you will not tell anyone about this. Not Michael, not Sophie, not your husband, not anyone, until I say it is time." There was another pause, longer this time. Then she said, "The best family law attorney I know is Patricia Donovan. You know her. She used to work at your firm." I did know her. Patricia had started as a junior associate at the firm when I was already senior paralegal. I had trained her in some ways. Taught her how to read financial disclosures, how to spot inconsistencies, how to organize a case file so that nothing could be missed or misrepresented. She had left the firm 15 years ago to start her own practice. I had not spoken to her in years, but I knew she was good. Better than good. I said, "Can you get me her number?" Renata said, "I have it. I'll text it to you as soon as we hang up." Then quieter, "Mom, are you okay?" I thought about that question. I did not answer right away. Was I okay? No, I was not okay. I was sitting alone in my kitchen on a Friday morning, having just told my daughter that her father was leaving me for my best friend. And I was not okay in any of the ways that word usually means, but I was functional. I was clear-headed. I was capable of doing what needed to be done. I said, "I will be." Renata's voice was very steady when she spoke again. "I won't tell anyone. Not until you say, I promise." I said, "Thank you." She said, "I love you." I said, "I love you too." We hung up. 3 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text, Patricia Donovan's name and number, and underneath it, single line from Renata. "Call her today. Don't wait." I called her that afternoon. Patricia remembered me immediately. Her voice was warm, professional, surprised in a way that made it clear she had not expected to hear from me. We exchanged the usual pleasantries. "How are you? How is retirement? I heard your daughter is doing well." And then I said very simply, "I need to hire you. I am about to file for divorce. And I need someone who will not underestimate what my husband is capable of." There was a brief pause. Then Patricia said, "Can you come to my office Monday morning?" I said, "I could." She said, "Bring everything. every document you have. Every email, every bank statement, every piece of paper with his name on it. And do not, under any circumstances, tell him you are coming to see me. I said, I won't. She said, Eleanor, I am sorry this is happening. But if you are calling me, it means you already know what you are doing, so let's do it right. I felt something loosen in my chest when she said that. Not relief, exactly, but recognition. She understood, she knew. I said thank you. We hung up. I spent the rest of that day and all of Saturday gathering documents. I printed the emails from Martin's account, all of them, the entire thread dated and organized. I took screenshots of the shared calendar. I downloaded our bank statements going back 2 years. I made copies of our tax returns, our mortgage paperwork, the title to the house, the registration for both cars. I requested statements from our investment accounts. I compiled a list of every asset I could think of: retirement funds, savings bonds, the small inheritance I had received when my mother died and deposited into our joint savings account in 2003. I did all of this while Martin was in the house. He was home most of Saturday. We had breakfast together. We ran errands. We worked in the garden for an hour in the afternoon, pulling weeds, trimming back the hedges that had grown unruly along the fence. He talked about needing to reseal the deck before winter. I agreed. I said we should get estimates. It was a normal Saturday, completely unbearably normal, and the entire time in the back of my mind, I was cataloging, watching. Listening to the way he spoke to me, the way he looked at me, searching for any sign that he suspected I knew. There was none. Sunday evening, Martin left for his investment group at 6:30. I waited until I heard his car pull out of the driveway. Then I went to the office and I logged the time of his departure in the legal pad. Date, time, stated destination, expected return. I had begun keeping a movement log. Every time he left the house, I wrote it down. Every time he received a phone call and left the room to take it, I noted the time and duration. Every time he checked his phone and I saw his expression shift, just slightly. Just enough. I made a record. I was building a case. Monday morning, I met with Patricia. She spent 3 hours reviewing everything I had brought. She did not interrupt. She took notes in a neat, careful hand. When she finished, she looked up at me and said, "This is good work, Eleanor. Better than most clients bring me in 3 months, and you did it in 3 days." I said, "I know what you need." She said, "You do." Then, here is what happens next. I am going to engage a forensic accountant to trace every dollar that has moved out of your joint accounts. I am going to file a motion to freeze any further transfers the moment we file for divorce. And I am going to prepare a filing that we will submit on June 29th, 1 day before he plans to tell you he is leaving. June 29th, 1 day before Martin's midnight. I nodded. Patricia said, "In the meantime, you do nothing. You do not confront him. You do not change your behavior in any way. You act exactly as you have been acting. Can you do that?" I thought about sitting across from Martin at dinner, about saying good morning and good night, about kissing him goodbye when he left for work, the same automatic gesture he gave me every evening before bed. I said yes. She believed me. That evening I made dinner. Martin came home at his usual time. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where I had sat 3 nights earlier reading the timeline of my own abandonment, and I asked him how his day was. He said it was fine. Busy. The usual. I asked how the investment group was going. He said it was interesting. They were talking about portfolio diversification. He was learning a lot. I nodded. I said that sounded useful. He smiled at me. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I smiled back, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not grief, not even the cold clarity I had felt when I first read the emails, just the quiet, professional stillness of a woman who had done this work before and knew exactly how it ended. The performance began on a Tuesday morning, 1 week after I met with Patricia. I came downstairs for breakfast and I stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, looking around as though I had forgotten something. Martin was already at the table with his coffee and the newspaper. He glanced up. "Morning," he said. I said good morning. Then I paused. I looked at the counter. I looked at the cupboard. I let a small line appear between my eyebrows, the expression of someone trying to retrieve a thought that has slipped just out of reach. Did I? I started, then stopped. I thought I came down here for something. I can't remember what. It was a small thing, barely noticeable. the kind of minor memory lapse that happens to everyone at any age a dozen times a day. But I let it sit in the air between us for just a beat longer than I normally would have. I let myself look uncertain. Martin looked at me. Something shifted in his expression. Not concern exactly. More like attention. The kind of attention you pay when you notice a thing you have been half expecting to notice. He said, "Coffee, maybe?" I blinked. "Oh, yes, coffee, that's right. I made coffee." I sat down at the table. We had breakfast the way we always did. And I did not do anything else unusual that morning, but the seed had been planted. I had decided, in consultation with Patricia, that this was the strategy I was going to use. Not because it was easy. It was not easy. It was possibly the hardest thing I have ever done, for reasons I will try to explain, but it was effective. Men like Martin, men who are planning to leave, who have already begun to construct a narrative in which leaving is justified, even necessary, are looking for evidence that supports that narrative. They are looking for reasons to believe that the person they are abandoning is already diminished, already less than they used to be, already in some sense lost. It makes the leaving easier. It makes it feel less like cruelty and more like inevitability. I was going to give Martin that evidence, and in doing so, I was going to make him careless. The performance I chose was drawn from the deepest fear I have about my own aging. Not death, not illness, exactly, but the slow erosion of competence, the fear that one day I will reach for a word and it will not be there. That I will forget why I walked into a room. That I will become, gradually and then all at once, someone who needs to be managed rather than someone who manages. It is a fear that lives in every older woman I know. Whether we speak it aloud or not, the fear that we will be diminished, that we will become invisible in a way that is not metaphorical but literal, that people will stop seeing us as capable, as sharp, as present. I was going to perform that fear. I was going to become the version of myself I am most afraid of becoming, and I was going to do it so carefully, so gradually, that Martin would not question it. Over the next 2 weeks, I misremembered small things aloud. I asked Martin what day the lawn service was coming, even though it had been the same day for 5 years. I stood at the counter one evening staring at the coffee maker as though I could not quite remember how to set the timer for the morning. I mentioned casually that I had been feeling a little foggy lately, just tired, probably. Or maybe I needed to get my iron levels checked. I asked Martin to remind me of the password for our online banking account. He gave it to me. I wrote it down on a slip of paper with a slightly shaky hand, and I tucked it into the drawer by the phone, the same drawer where I kept the legal pad that documented every movement he made, every call he took, every lie he told. None of these moments were dramatic. That was important. I did not forget entire conversations. I did not leave the stove on or lose my keys or do anything that would seem alarming enough to require intervention. I just seemed softer, slower, a little less present, a little less capable of noticing things. And Martin noticed. I watched it happen in real time. The way his posture changed when I asked him for a password I already knew. The way he began to speak to me. Just slightly. Just at the edges, the way you speak to someone you are taking care of rather than someone you are living alongside. A gentleness that was not kindness. A patience that was not respect. He began to relax, that was the word for it. Over the course of those 2 weeks, I watched my husband relax in my presence in a way he had not been relaxed before, and I understood that the thing he was relaxed about was the prospect of being caught. He stopped leaving the room to take phone calls. The first time it happened, I was washing dishes and his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. He answered it right there in the kitchen, 5 feet away from me, and he said, "Hey, let me call you back in a few minutes. I'm just finishing something up." His voice was easy. Unrehearsed, he hung up. He did not tell me who it was. He did not explain. He just set the phone down on the counter, face up this time. And he left the room. 10 minutes later, I heard him on the call in the office. The door was closed, but his voice carried. I could not make out words, but I could hear the tone. Warm. Informal. The voice he used with someone he loved. I stood in the kitchen and I stared at the phone he had left on the counter. Face up. Unlocked. He had never done that before. It happened again 2 days later. He took a call at the kitchen table while I was making lunch. This time he stayed in the room. He said, "I know. I can't wait either, just a little longer." I did not react. I sliced tomatoes. I assembled sandwiches. I moved around the kitchen as though I had not heard, or had heard but had not understood. Or had understood but did not think it was worth asking about. When he hung up, he smiled at me. I smiled back. He started leaving his phone on the charger overnight instead of keeping it on his nightstand. He left it in the kitchen in the mornings when he went outside for his walk, the same walk he took every day at 7 a.m., 20 minutes through the neighborhood, a routine he had maintained for years. The first morning he left his phone behind. I stood at the kitchen window and watched him disappear around the corner at the end of the street. Then I picked up his phone. It was unlocked, no passcode. He had disabled it. I opened his messages. The most recent thread was with Diane. I scrolled through quickly, efficiently, photographing each screen with my own phone. I did not read carefully. There was no time. I just documented. One message from the night before. Can't believe it's only 8 more days. I keep looking at the calendar. Martin's response sent at 6:42 that morning. I know. It feels real now. I'm ready, Diane. Are you scared, Martin? A little, but more excited than scared. This is the right thing, Diane. I love you. Martin, I love you too. I took the photos. I put his phone back on the charger exactly as I had found it. I went upstairs and I uploaded the photos to a folder Patricia had created for me onto a secure cloud server. Then I came back downstairs and I started making breakfast. And when Martin came home from his walk, flushed and breathing hard and smiling, I asked him if he wanted eggs. He said that would be great. I made him eggs. The forensic accountant Patricia had hired sent his preliminary report on June 22nd, 8 days before Martin's planned midnight. Patricia called me that afternoon. She said, "Eleanor, can you come to the office? I want to walk you through this in person." I went that afternoon. Martin thought I was at a book club meeting. Patricia's office was in a building downtown, 3rd floor, large windows that looked out over the street. She had the report printed and organized in a binder with tabbed sections. She walked me through it page by page. The total amount moved out of our joint accounts over the 14 months since the affair began was $94,000. 94,000. It had been moved in increments, just as the restructuring proposal had recommended. Never more than 1,000 at a time. Withdrawn from the joint savings account or transferred out of the joint investment portfolio. Or pulled from the checking account in amounts that could be explained as routine expenses if anyone asked. But no one had asked. Because I had been performing confusion, and before that, I simply had not been looking closely enough. The money had been moved into 3 separate accounts, all titled in Martin's name only. A high-yield savings account at a bank I had never heard of. A rollover IRA that had been framed, in the paperwork, as routine retirement planning. And a brokerage account opened 4 months ago. Patricia pointed to a line on one of the statements. This one is joint with another name. See here? I looked. The secondary account holder on the brokerage account was Diane Kowalski. They had opened a joint account together, while still married to other people. While lying to those people every single day, I stared at the page for a long moment. Patricia said quietly, "Eleanor, I need you to know that this is recoverable. All of it. This is textbook dissipation of marital assets. When we file, we will be asking for full reimbursement, plus a disproportionate share of remaining assets to account for his misconduct. He will not get away with this." I nodded. I believed her, but in that moment, sitting in her office looking at a spreadsheet that documented 14 months of theft from the marriage I had believed was real, what I felt was not anger about the money, it was anger about the arrogance. He had truly believed I would not notice, or that if I did notice, I would not understand, or that if I understood, I would not be capable of doing anything about it. He had stolen $94,000 from me while I slept in the same bed, and he had thought he was being careful. I met Renata for coffee the next day. I had been updating her in careful doses. Never too much at once. Never more than she could sit with without reacting in a way that might give us away. But the forensic report felt like something she needed to know in full. We met at a cafe halfway between her office and the house. It was mid-morning. Not crowded. We sat in the back corner. I slid a printed copy of the report across the table. Renata read it in silence. I watched her face. I have known that face for 38 years. I know every expression it is capable of making. I watched anger move through it like weather. Her jaw tightened. Her hands holding the pages began to shake. When she finished reading, she set the report down very carefully on the table. She looked at me. Her eyes were wet. She said, "Mom." Her voice cracked. "I want to call him right now. I want to." I reached across the table and I put my hand over hers. I did not say anything. I just held her hand the way I had held it when she was small and scared and needed to be steadied. The same gesture, the same pressure, maternal authority that required no words. Renata stopped talking. She took a breath. She closed her eyes. She nodded. I said very quietly, "4 more days." She said, "4 more days." I said, "And then you can say whatever you need to say." She nodded again. She wiped her eyes with the back of her free hand. She looked at me with an expression I will remember for the rest of my life. Fury and grief and love all tangled together in a way that made her look exactly as she had looked at 7 years old. Standing in the kitchen after a neighborhood kid had pushed her brother off his bike, she had wanted to fight then too. I had taught her to wait, to think, to choose her moment. She had learned. We finished our coffee. We did not talk about the report again. We talked about her children, about work, about the weather. Normal things. A normal conversation between a mother and daughter on a Wednesday morning in June. When we stood to leave, Renata hugged me. She held on longer than usual. She said into my shoulder, "I am so proud of you." I did not cry. I had not cried once in the 3 weeks since I found the emails. I did not cry then either, but I held on to my daughter and I let myself feel, just for a moment, what it meant to not be alone in this. The night before, June 29th, the night before Martin's planned midnight, I performed the role one last time. We had dinner together. I made pasta, something simple. We ate at the kitchen table. We talked about small things. The garden, the weather. A phone call Martin had gotten from an old colleague. I mentioned halfway through the meal that I had been feeling tired lately, more than usual. I said I thought maybe I should make an appointment with my doctor, just to check that everything was okay. Martin looked at me with an expression I might have once mistaken for concern. He said, "That's probably a good idea. You have seemed a little, I don't know, a little off lately." "A little off." I nodded. I said, "I thought so too. I'm sure it's nothing. Just getting older, probably." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. The same gesture he had made a dozen times over the past 3 weeks, a gesture of comfort, of reassurance, a gesture that said, "I am taking care of you." I squeezed back. After dinner, he made tea. Chamomile, the kind I liked before bed. He brought it to me while I was sitting on the couch with a book, and he set it on the side table next to me with a careful gentleness, the way you set things down near someone fragile. He kissed me on the forehead. He said, "I love you, Eleanor." I looked up at him. I saw the face I had woken up next to for 40 years, the face I had loved or believed I loved, or loved once and had continued to love out of habit long past the point when the original feeling had faded into something quieter and more automatic. I said, "I love you too." And here is the complicated truth. I meant it. Not in the present tense, not for the man standing in front of me at that moment. The man who had a suitcase already packed in the trunk of his car, and a hotel room key waiting in his wallet, and a script in his mind for how he was going to leave me in less than 24 hours. But I meant it for the memory of him. For the version of Martin who had held 2 babies while I fed the third. Who had refinished the floors of our first house. Who had sat with me in a hospital room the night my father died, and held my hand exactly the way he was holding it now. Except then it had been real. I loved that version. I would probably always love that version, in the same way you love things that are gone. Not because they are still alive, but because they were once real and their absence leaves a shape. So I said it back, "I love you too." He smiled. He squeezed my hand one more time. Then he went upstairs. I sat on the couch, with my tea cooling beside me and my book open in my lap unread, and I thought about the fact that tomorrow, June 30th, at 11 p.m., according to the calendar entry I had photographed and sent to Patricia, and uploaded to a server where it could never be deleted or denied, Martin was going to come downstairs with his suitcase and his script and his plan. And he was going to discover that I had a plan too. I did not drink the tea. I sat there until the house was quiet, until I heard Martin's breathing shift into the deep rhythm of sleep, and then I stood up and I walked to the kitchen. The ceramic bluebird was still on the windowsill. I had not moved it. I had not touched it in weeks, except to wipe the dust from it when I cleaned. I looked at it for a long time. Then I turned off the lights, and I went upstairs. And I lay down next to my husband for the last time. And I did not sleep at all. I called Renata at 9:30 that morning. I need all three of you here tonight at 11:30, I said. Don't ask questions yet. Just be here. And Renata, you need to tell Michael and Sophie in the car on the way over, not before. Can you do that? There was a pause. Then she said, yes. I said, park on the street, not in the driveway. Come through the front door, it will be unlocked, she said. Mom, I said, 11:30. All three of you. I hung up. At 10 that morning, I drove to Patricia's office and signed the divorce papers. Patricia had prepared everything, the petition for dissolution of marriage, the motion to freeze all joint assets pending resolution, the request for temporary spousal support, the demand for full accounting of dissipated marital funds, 40 years of marriage reduced to legal language, formatted in 12-point Times New Roman font, filed in triplicate. I signed my name on every page. Eleanor Price. The same signature I had used to process thousands of other people's divorces. Now it was mine, Patricia said. These will be filed first thing Monday morning. Effective immediately, he will be prohibited from moving any additional funds. The court will order him to provide full financial disclosure within 30 days. I nodded. She handed me a single sheet of paper, a letter on her firm's letterhead addressed to Martin, confirming that Eleanor Price had retained counsel and filed for divorce, effective Monday, July 3rd. It was formal, clinical. It contained no accusations, no emotional language, just the facts of what had been filed and what it meant. I put the letter in the manila folder with everything else. Patricia said, Eleanor, are you ready for this? I thought about that question. Was I ready? I had spent 3 weeks gathering evidence. I had documented $94,000 in dissipated assets. I had photographed email threads and text messages and calendar entries. I had performed cognitive decline so convincingly that my husband had grown careless enough to leave his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. I had retained the best family law attorney I knew. I had prepared my children. I had filed first. I was as ready as it was possible to be. I said yes. At 11 that evening, I was standing in my kitchen, fully dressed, waiting. I had not pretended to go to bed. There was no point in maintaining the performance now. I stood at the island in the same spot where I had stood 3 weeks ago, when I first found out what Martin was planning. But this time I was not holding a mug of cold tea. This time I was holding a folder that contained the end of my marriage. The front door opened at 11:28. I heard the soft sound of it closing again. I heard whispered voices in the front hall. I heard footsteps moving through the living room, careful and quiet. Renata appeared in the kitchen doorway first. She looked at me and I nodded. She moved to the table and sat down in the chair closest to the window. Michael came next. He was taller than his sisters, quieter. The one who had always watched and listened before speaking. He sat across from Renata without saying anything. Sophie was last. She had driven down from the city that afternoon, according to the text she had sent me. She looked tired, confused. She sat in the chair between her siblings and looked at me with a question in her eyes that I could not answer yet. It was 11:32. We waited. The house was completely quiet. Upstairs, Martin was asleep, or had been until a few minutes ago. I did not know if he had heard them come in. I did not know if he was awake now, looking at the clock, preparing himself for what he believed was going to happen. At 11:40, I heard movement upstairs. The soft sound of feet hitting the floor, the creak of the floorboard by the bedroom door, the particular rhythm of someone trying to move quietly in a house they have lived in for 30 years. I looked at my children. Renata's hands were folded on the table in front of her. Michael was staring at the wall. Sophie was looking back and forth between all of us, still trying to understand what was happening. At 11:41, I heard the suitcase. The same sound I had heard 3 weeks ago, the drag of wheels across hardwood. But this time I knew exactly what it meant. This time I was ready. Martin appeared in the kitchen doorway at 11:42. He was dressed the same way he had been 3 weeks ago in my imagination of this moment. Clean shirt, dark trousers, freshly shaved. He had the rolling suitcase beside him, the handle extended. But this time, when he looked into the kitchen, he did not see one woman standing alone at the island. He saw 4 people. I watched his face change. It was subtle at first, just a flicker of something moving behind his eyes. Then his posture shifted. His grip on the suitcase handle tightened. He looked at me. He looked at the children. He looked back at me. I saw him recalibrate in real time. This was not the scene he had rehearsed. This was not the script he had prepared. This was not the calm, kind, quick conversation he had planned. With me tired and off balance and manageable, this was something else entirely. He cleared his throat. "Kids," he said. His voice was careful, measured. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." None of them responded. Martin looked at me again. I could see him thinking. I could see him trying to rewrite the narrative in his mind, trying to figure out what story would work with this audience. With these witnesses, he set the suitcase handle down. He said, "Eleanor, maybe we should talk privately first." I said, "No." The word hung in the air between us. Martin's eyes shifted to the children again, then back to me. I could see him making another choice, reaching for different language. The tone of a man who was here for a family conversation rather than a midnight escape. He said, "All right, I suppose you all should hear this together." He moved into the kitchen, but stayed near the doorway. He did not sit down. He kept the distance of someone who was planning to leave. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," he said. "About our marriage, Eleanor. About whether we're both happy. Whether we're both getting what we need." I let him talk. "I think you know that things haven't been the same between us for a while. We've grown apart. We want different things." And I reached under the island and pulled out the folder. Martin stopped talking. I set the folder on the pale green tile, and I slid it across the counter toward him. I said, "Before you finish that sentence, you should probably look at what's in there." The kitchen was completely silent. Martin stared at the folder. He did not reach for it immediately. He looked at me. He looked at the children. His face had gone very pale. Sophie said, "Dad." "What's going on?" Martin did not answer her. He was still staring at the folder. I said, "Open it." He reached for it with a hand that was not quite steady. He opened the cover. The first page was the printed email thread. The entire conversation between him and Diane, going back 14 months. I had highlighted certain lines. "Drive safe. I'll be thinking about you all night." Being with her felt like waking up after years of sleepwalking. "Only 3 more weeks, and we don't have to do this anymore." Martin's face went gray. He turned the page. The second document was the forensic accountant's report. 23 pages detailing every withdrawal, every transfer, every dollar of the $94,000 he had moved out of our joint accounts. I had highlighted the total amount on the first page. I had highlighted the dates. I had highlighted the account numbers. He turned the page again. The screenshot of the shared calendar entry, *M tells E midnight clean start. The note, in bed by 11, M downstairs by 11:30, bag already packed in car, calm, kind, quick. Do not engage if she gets emotional. Martin stopped turning pages. He looked up at me. His mouth opened. No sound came out. The last document in the folder was Patricia's letter, the confirmation that I had filed for divorce, that I had retained counsel, that as of Monday morning, he would be legally prohibited from moving any additional assets, that his carefully constructed plan was already over. Martin closed the folder. The kitchen was still completely quiet. Then Michael spoke. Michael, who had said maybe 50 words total since he walked into the kitchen. Michael, who had inherited his father's height and his mother's way of watching before speaking. Michael, who was 38 years old and had never, in his entire life, raised his voice to either of his parents. He said, "You took $94,000 from Mom while you were fucking her best friend." His voice was not loud. It was not angry, exactly. It was something worse than angry. It was disgusted. It was the tone of someone who had just discovered that a person they had respected their entire life was someone they did not recognize. He said, "And you thought she was too stupid to notice." Those were the 2 sentences. 14 words total. They landed in the kitchen like stones dropping into still water. Martin's mouth opened and closed. He looked at Michael. He looked at me. He looked at the folder in his hands. He said, "It's not. You don't understand," Renata said. "We understand perfectly." Her voice was steady, professional. She sounded exactly like the lawyer she was. She said, "You've been conducting an affair for 14 months. You've been systematically stealing money from your joint accounts with Mom. You've been planning to leave her tonight at midnight with no warning and no discussion. After 40 years of marriage, You made a shared calendar entry about it. Sophie was crying, not sobbing, just tears running down her face as she stared at her father. She said, "Diane?" Her voice was very small. "It's Diane?" I nodded. Sophie closed her eyes. Martin said, "Kids, please, let me explain. It's not what it looks like. Your mother and I, we've been having problems for years. We've grown apart. This isn't anyone's fault." Michael stood up. He was 6 feet 3 inches tall. He looked exactly like Martin had looked 30 years ago. And when he stood up, the resemblance was so striking that for a moment it was like seeing Martin's younger self rise up to confront his older self. Michael said, "Sit down." Martin sat down, not in a chair. On the edge of the counter behind him, as though his legs had given out, Michael said, "You will not speak to Mom that way. You will not talk about problems you created as though they happened to you. You will not stand in this kitchen with a packed suitcase and $94,000 of stolen money and tell us this isn't anyone's fault." Martin was shaking now, visibly shaking. Renata said, "Mom filed for divorce this morning. It will be processed Monday. The court has ordered a full freeze on all joint assets. You can't touch another penny," Sophie said. "Where were you going to go?" Her voice was still very quiet. "Tonight." "Where were you going?" Martin did not answer. I said, "The Monterey Hotel. Room 512, Diane was waiting." Sophie made a sound, not quite a sob, something smaller and more broken. Renata said, "Joel knows." Martin's head snapped up. "What?" I said. "I had my attorney send him a registered letter this afternoon, with copies of the emails. He knows about the affair. He knows about the joint brokerage account you and Diane opened together." Martin's face went white. He said, "Eleanor, please." "You don't understand. Diane and I, we didn't mean for it to happen. It just," I said, "stop." The word cut across the kitchen like a blade. I said, "You made a calendar entry. You planned this down to the minute. You rehearsed what you were going to say to me. You moved our money into accounts with her name on them. You did not stumble into this, Martin. You chose it. Every single day for 14 months, you chose it." He was crying now. Silent tears running down his face. He said, "I love her." The kitchen was quiet again. Then Renata said, "Good for you." Her voice was ice. She said, "I hope it was worth $94,000. I hope it was worth 40 years of marriage. I hope it was worth your children looking at you the way we're looking at you right now." Martin looked at her. He looked at Michael. He looked at Sophie, who was still crying. He said, "I never wanted to hurt anyone." Michael laughed, not with humor. So, with something that sounded like disgust, he said, "You made a calendar entry titled Clean Start. You wanted to hurt Mom so little that you planned to walk out on her at midnight with no warning while she slept." Martin did not respond. I said, "The suitcase is packed?" He nodded. I said, "Good. Take it and go." Martin looked at me. For the first time since he had opened the folder, he looked directly at me. He said, "Eleanor." I said, "Go." He stood up. He walked to the suitcase. He extended the handle. He looked back at the children. He opened his mouth as though he was going to say something else. Michael said, "Don't." Martin closed his mouth. He wheeled the suitcase to the kitchen doorway. He stopped there and turned back to look at me one more time. I was standing in exactly the same spot where I had been standing when he came downstairs. I had not moved. I had not spoken except to answer questions and give directions. I had not cried. I was holding the folder. The evidence of everything he had done and everything he had planned to do. He said, "I'm sorry." I said, "No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught." He opened his mouth again. Then he closed it. He left. I heard the front door close. I heard his car start in the driveway. I heard him drive away. At 12:17 a.m., 13 minutes after the midnight he had chosen, Martin left our house for the last time. The kitchen was quiet. Sophie was still crying. Renata had moved to stand beside her, one hand on her shoulder. Michael was still standing by the table, staring at the spot where his father had been. I set the folder down on the island. I said, "Are you all okay?" Renata nodded. Michael nodded. Sophie wiped her eyes and nodded. I said, "You can stay here tonight if you want. All of you. There are clean sheets in the linen closet." Sophie said, "Mom, are you okay?" I thought about that question. Was I okay? My husband of 40 years had just left me for my best friend of 32 years, taking $94,000 with him and leaving behind a calendar entry that documented the specific cruelty of how he had planned to do it. I was not okay in any conventional sense of that word, but I was still here. I was still standing. I had seen it coming and I had prepared for it, and I had handled it exactly the way I had planned to handle it. I said, I will be. The divorce was finalized 4 months later, on October 15th. It proceeded exactly as Patricia had said it would. On Eleanor's terms, on Eleanor's timeline, with Eleanor's evidence setting the framework for every conversation that followed. Martin hired an attorney 3 days after he left the house. A man named Robert Kellerman, who specialized in family law, according to his website, and who had decent reviews but no particular reputation for handling complex financial cases. He was the kind of attorney you hire when you need someone quickly, when you have been caught off guard, when you are reacting rather than planning. Patricia knew him. She said he was competent but not particularly thorough. She said he tended to settle cases rather than fight them, which was usually good for clients who wanted to avoid prolonged litigation, but not particularly helpful for clients who needed aggressive representation. Martin, it turned out, needed aggressive representation. The first settlement conference was held 3 weeks after Martin left. I sat beside Patricia at a conference table in her office, while Martin and Robert Kellerman sat across from us. It was the first time I had seen Martin since the night in the kitchen. He looked smaller. That was the word for it. Not physically smaller, although he had lost weight, but diminished in some fundamental way, as though the careful construction of competence and control he had maintained for 40 years had been stripped away, leaving behind someone I barely recognized. Patricia opened the meeting by laying out our position. Eleanor Price was seeking dissolution of the marriage with an unequal division of assets based on Martin's dissipation of marital funds. The forensic accounting had documented $94,000 moved into accounts titled in Martin's name only, or jointly with a third party, over the 14 months preceding separation. Eleanor was seeking full reimbursement of that amount, plus the family home, plus 60% of all remaining joint assets, plus spousal support for a period of 5 years. Martin's attorney asked to see the documentation. Patricia handed him a binder, 300 pages, every email I had printed, every bank statement the forensic accountant had requested, every photograph I had taken of text messages and calendar entries, every receipt, every transfer record, every piece of evidence I had gathered during those 3 weeks. When Martin believed I was growing confused, Robert Kellerman spent 40 minutes reviewing the binder. When he finished, he looked at Martin. Then he looked back at Patricia. He said, "We request a brief recess." Patricia and I waited in her office while Martin and his attorney talked in the conference room across the hall. Through the glass wall, I could see Martin's posture, slumped, defeated. The posture of a man who had walked into a fight expecting his opponent to be unarmed and discovered she had brought a cannon. When they returned, Robert Kellerman's tone had changed. He said, "My client would like to discuss terms." The terms, as they evolved over the next 2 months, were precisely what Patricia had predicted. Eleanor received the house. Eleanor received full reimbursement for the dissipated funds. Eleanor received 60% of the joint investment portfolio, including the retirement account Martin had been contributing to for 25 years. Eleanor received spousal support in an amount calculated to maintain her standard of living for 5 years, or until she chose to remarry, whichever came first. Martin received his personal belongings, his car, and 40% of what remained after reimbursements and asset division. Martin initially tried to contest the settlement. His attorney filed a motion arguing that the asset division was punitive rather than equitable, that Eleanor's age and employment history entitled her to spousal support but not to a disproportionate share of marital property, that the $94,000 represented legitimate financial planning rather than dissipation. The motion was denied. The judge, a woman in her 50s who had been on the family court bench for 15 years, reviewed the evidence binder and ruled that Martin's actions constituted clear dissipation of marital assets undertaken in contemplation of divorce for the purpose of reducing Eleanor's share of the marital estate. She noted that the transfers had been made without Eleanor's knowledge, that they coincided with the beginning of Martin's extramarital relationship, and that they had been structured deliberately to avoid detection. She also noted that Eleanor's 38 years of experience as a family court paralegal made it reasonable to conclude that she understood the legal implications of the financial documentation better than most litigants, and that Martin's assumption that she would not notice or understand the transfers reflected a significant miscalculation on his part. The judge used the word miscalculation. I appreciated that. After the ruling, Robert Kellerman advised Martin to accept the terms. He said a trial would be expensive, time-consuming, and unlikely to result in a more favorable outcome. He said the evidence was comprehensive and damaging, and that further litigation would only increase attorney fees, while drawing out a process that Martin seemed eager to conclude. Martin signed the settlement agreement on September 20th. I signed it the same day in Patricia's office, with my children present as witnesses. All three of them had attended every significant meeting and court date. They had made it clear, without my asking, that they intended to be there for every step of the process. The day the decree was finalized, Renata took me to lunch. We went to a restaurant downtown, the kind of place with white tablecloths and wine by the glass and food that was too expensive for ordinary occasions. Renata ordered champagne. She said, "To Mom, who knows how to read paperwork." I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in months, but the truth was that I did not feel like celebrating. Not because I was sad about the divorce. I was not sad about the divorce. I was relieved about the divorce, but dismantling 40 years of shared life is not triumph, even when it is necessary, even when it is justice. It is just work. Procedural, methodical work that has to be done with steady hands and careful attention to detail. The same way I had built that life, I took it apart. Diane's marriage ended even more quickly than mine. I heard about it secondhand, through a woman named Janet who lived 3 streets over and had always been friendly with both Diane and me. Janet called 2 weeks after Martin left, ostensibly to check on me after hearing that Martin and I were separated, but really to tell me what she knew. Joel had filed for divorce 4 days after receiving the registered letter from Patricia. He had not asked Diane for an explanation. He had not requested couples counseling. He had simply retained an attorney and begun proceedings. Janet said Joel was staying in the house. She said Diane was looking for an apartment. She said Diane had not been seen at the grocery store or the bank or any of the places she usually went. She said her car was gone from the driveway most days. Janet did not say any of this with malice. She said it with the careful neutrality of someone who was trying to be a good neighbor to both parties in a difficult situation. But underneath the neutrality, I heard something else. A coolness. A distance that had not been there before. People in our neighborhood had known Joel for 30 years. He was quiet, decent, reliable. The kind of man who plowed his neighbor's driveway without being asked, who returned borrowed tools in better condition than he had received them. People liked him. People respected him. Diane, by contrast, had always been more of an acquired taste, charming in small doses, quick with a joke or a piece of gossip, but not someone you called in an emergency. Not someone you trusted with anything that mattered, when forced to choose sides, and divorce always forces people to choose sides, whether they want to or not. The neighborhood chose Joel. It helped that I did not ask them to choose me. I continued going to book club. I continued attending neighborhood association meetings. I continued shopping at the same grocery store, banking at the same branch, attending the same church. Martin and I had attended together for 15 years. I kept showing up. That was all it took. I kept showing up, and people treated me the same way they always had. A little more gently, perhaps. A little more carefully. But fundamentally the same. Diane stopped showing up. She moved out of the neighborhood in November, 3 weeks before the divorce was finalized. I heard about it from Janet again. A moving truck on a Wednesday morning. Joel standing in the driveway, but not hiding either. Diane loading boxes into her car while the movers handled the furniture. Janet said she looked thin, tired. She said Diane had tried to wave at her, but Janet had been getting her mail and had not seen her in time to wave back. I did not ask where Diane was moving. I did not want to know. Martin moved into an apartment complex on the other side of town, one of those generic places with a swimming pool and a fitness center and rent that includes basic cable. The kind of place people live when they are starting over, or when they are trying to live cheaply while paying alimony. Michael drove by at once and reported back that Martin's car was there, parked in front of a unit on the second floor. He said the complex looked fine, clean, safe, the kind of place that was perfectly adequate for a man living alone. I told Michael not to drive by again. I said his father's living situation was not our concern anymore. But I was glad to know that Martin was housed somewhere decent, not because I cared about his comfort, but because I did not want my children to worry about him being homeless or destitute. They had enough to process without adding guilt about their father's practical well-being. The practical settlement of our joint obligations took months. There were credit cards to close and utilities to transfer and subscription services to cancel. There were insurance policies to update and beneficiaries to change and tax situations to untangle. There were 40 years' worth of shared financial entanglements that had to be carefully separated, account by account, line item by line item. I did most of this work myself. I had the experience for it, and I found the detailed, methodical nature of it soothing. It was work that required precision but not emotion. It was work that had clear rules and predictable outcomes. I changed the locks on the house in August. I hired a landscaping service to maintain the yard, something Martin had always done himself. I opened new accounts at a different bank, one Martin had never used. I updated my will and my medical power of attorney documents. I bought a new car, something compact and reliable that I chose entirely based on my own preferences without consulting anyone. Each of these changes was small, practical, but together they added up to something larger. The construction of a life that belonged entirely to me. Patricia called in December to tell me that Martin's final alimony payment had been deposited and the case was officially closed. She said, "How are you feeling?" I thought about that question. How was I feeling? I was angry still. I did not think the anger would go away anytime soon, and I did not think it should. Martin had stolen from me. Diane had betrayed me. The anger was proportionate to the offense, but underneath the anger was something steadier, something that felt like solid ground. I said, "I feel competent." Patricia laughed. She said, "You should. You handled this exactly right." After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a while, looking around at the space that was now entirely mine. The pale green subway tile was still there. The bluebird was still on the windowsill. The legal pad was still in the drawer, though I had stopped adding entries to it months ago. Everything looked the same, but the quality of the space had changed. It was quieter now, calmer. There was no one in the house but me, which meant there was no one to perform for. No one to manage, no one to worry about except myself. The loneliness would come later, I knew. It was already starting to come, in small waves, usually in the evenings when the house was dark and I found myself listening for sounds that would not come. A car in the driveway, keys on the counter, footsteps on the stairs. But for now, in the immediate aftermath of everything that had happened, what I felt was not loneliness. What I felt was peace. The storm had passed. The paperwork was filed. The procedural work of dismantling 40 years of shared life was complete. And I was still here, still competent, still capable. Still myself, the person Martin and Diane had assumed I was. Confused, declining, easy to deceive, had never existed. That person had been a performance, designed to make them careless enough to reveal themselves fully. The person I actually was had read their emails, traced their money, documented their plans, and beaten them at a game they did not know they were playing. I sat in my kitchen, in my house, with my settlement and my alimony and my legal victory, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt proud of myself, not triumphant, not vindicated in some dramatic sense, just proud. I had done the work. I had handled it. I was fine, better than fine. I was free. 6 months after the midnight that changed everything, I wake up every morning at 5:30, not because I have to, because I want to. For the first time in 40 years, my morning belongs entirely to me. I make coffee in the quiet kitchen while the neighborhood is still dark. I sit at the table with the newspaper, the actual paper, delivered to my front step, not something read on a screen, and I drink my coffee slowly. There is no one to hurry for, no schedule to accommodate except my own, no performance to maintain, just the luxury of time that moves at the pace I choose. The house is different now in ways both large and small. The obvious changes first. Martin's chair is gone from the living room. His side of the closet is empty. The bathroom counter holds only my things, face cream and vitamins and reading glasses in a case I chose because I liked the color, not because it matched anything else. But the subtler changes matter more. The house is quieter. But it is not hollow. It is peaceful in a way it had not been for years before Martin left, even during the time when I thought we were happy. There is no undercurrent of tension, no sense of performing contentment for someone who was not really present to receive it. There are no secret phone calls being taken in other rooms, no passwords being changed, no money disappearing from accounts I thought were secure. There is just me and the life I am building deliberately, one choice at a time. In November, 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I moved the ceramic bluebird back to the kitchen windowsill. I had put it away during the worst of the proceedings, not hidden it, exactly, but placed it carefully in a box in the bedroom closet, wrapped in tissue paper, set aside until I could decide what it meant to me. For 32 years, that small blue figure had represented my friendship with Diane. Every morning when I washed dishes, every evening when I made dinner, I saw it there, and it reminded me of the person who had given it to me. The friend who had known me through children and careers and the ordinary difficulties of a long life. The woman I had called first when my father died. The woman who had brought me soup when I was sick, and who had listened to me complain about Martin's snoring, and who had shared the particular intimacy of two people who had watched each other's children grow up and move away. But after I found the emails, the bluebird had become something different, a reminder not of friendship, but of betrayal. Not of love given and received, but of trust broken and intimacy weaponized. I could not bear to look at it, so I put it away. But in November, sitting alone in the kitchen on a Sunday morning with the late fall sunlight coming through the window, I realized something important. The bluebird had not betrayed me. Diane had betrayed me. The woman who gave me the bluebird 32 years ago had become someone I did not recognize. Someone who could conduct a 14-month affair with my husband and plan his departure down to the minute and refer to me in their private emails as a logistical obstacle named Eleanor. But the woman who gave me the bluebird, the version of Diane who existed in 1991, who brought a gift to celebrate my children coming home, who wanted me to have something beautiful to look at on the impossible days, that woman had been real. That friendship had been real. I was allowed to mourn that version. I was allowed to remember what we had been to each other before she chose to destroy it. I was allowed to keep the gift that represented the good years, even while rejecting the woman who had stolen the recent ones. So I unwrapped the bluebird from its tissue paper, and I carried it downstairs, and I placed it back on the windowsill where it had lived for 3 decades. Not because I had forgiven Diane. I had not forgiven Diane. I might never forgive Diane, but because I had decided that the windowsill was mine, and the memory it held was mine. And I would not let her betrayal steal 32 years of genuine friendship from me retroactively. The bluebird stays on the windowsill now. It catches the morning light the same way it always did. It reminds me of something that was once beautiful and real, even though the person who created it chose to destroy it later. I have learned the difference between honoring what was true and excusing what was not. My children visit regularly now. More regularly than they did before the divorce, which surprises none of us. Renata comes every Sunday. We have coffee and we walk around the neighborhood, and we talk about her children, her work, the books she is reading, the repairs I am making to the house. We do not talk about Martin unless something practical requires it. A tax document that needs to be signed, a health insurance question, logistics related to the grandchildren's relationship with their grandfather. Renata has seen Martin 3 times since the night in the kitchen. The children agreed among themselves that they would maintain some relationship with him, for their own sake and for the sake of the grandchildren, but that the relationship would be different now. Smaller, more careful, built on what Martin had actually been to them, not what they had believed him to be. Michael and Sophie rotate weekends. Michael brings his fiancée, a woman named Sarah who is kind and practical and who treats me exactly as she did before, which I appreciate more than she probably knows. Sophie drives down from the city and we spend Saturday afternoons working in the garden or organizing closets or doing the small domestic projects that feel satisfying when shared with someone you love. The 4 of us, me and my 3 children, have grown closer through this. Not because trauma automatically creates intimacy, but because we went through something difficult together and we handled it well. We made good decisions. We supported each other. We did not let Martin's choices destroy anything more than what he had already destroyed. That matters. That feels like something worth protecting. In January, I started volunteering at a legal aid clinic downtown. 2 days a week, Tuesday and Thursday mornings, I sit across from women who are navigating divorce proceedings without adequate resources or representation. I help them organize their financial documents. I explain what the various court forms are asking for. I translate legal language into words that make sense. I teach them how to spot the patterns I spent 38 years learning to recognize. Most of them are younger than I am, but not all. There are women in their 60s and 70s who find themselves suddenly single after decades of marriage. Trying to understand retirement accounts and spousal support calculations and asset division formulas that determine the shape of the rest of their lives, many of them come to the clinic afraid. Not just of their husbands, though some are afraid of their husbands, but afraid of the legal system itself. Afraid that they will not understand the paperwork. Afraid that they will sign something they should not sign, or fail to ask for something they are entitled to. Or make some crucial mistake that costs them everything. They are afraid of being seen as incompetent, of being taken advantage of being dismissed or overlooked or treated as though they do not matter. I understand that fear intimately. The work is hard sometimes. Not technically hard. I know how to read a financial disclosure, how to calculate spousal support, how to identify dissipation of assets, but emotionally hard. Because I sit across from women who are discovering that their husbands have been lying to them for years, and I remember exactly how that feels. I remember the cold shock of it, the disorientation. The way betrayal makes you question everything you thought you knew about your own life, but the work is also satisfying in a way I had not expected. When I help a woman understand that her husband cannot legally empty their joint savings account without her consent, I am turning my own experience into something useful. When I show her how to request a forensic accounting, or how to document financial misconduct, or how to protect herself from further asset dissipation, I am giving her the tools that saved me. I am taking something ugly that was done to me and transforming it into something that helps other people avoid the same harm. That feels like victory in a way that the legal settlement, satisfying as it was, never could. The clinic supervisor, a woman named Maria, who has been doing this work for 15 years, told me last month that I have a gift for it. She said women trust me. She said I have a way of explaining complex things simply, without talking down to people, without making them feel stupid for not already knowing. I said, I spent 40 years watching people discover that the person they trusted most had been lying to them. I know what that looks like from both sides now. She nodded. She said, that's exactly why you're good at this. On quiet mornings, when I sit in my kitchen with my coffee and my newspaper and the bluebird catching the light on the windowsill, I think about the version of myself that Martin believed I was, confused, declining, easy to deceive. A woman whose competence was diminishing, whose attention was unreliable, whose capacity for understanding complex things was slowly eroding. A woman who could be stolen from for 14 months without noticing. A woman who could be left with a prepared speech and a packed suitcase, and who would accept it as inevitable because she was too diminished to fight it. That woman never existed, but I let Martin believe she existed. I performed her carefully, deliberately, with the same attention to detail I had once brought to organizing legal files. I made him believe I was becoming someone who did not pay attention, who did not understand, who did not remember things clearly. And in believing that, he became careless. He left his phone unlocked. He stopped hiding his lies. He made plans on shared calendars and forgot to worry about being discovered. He forgot to be afraid of me. That was his mistake, the mistake that cost him everything. Because the truth is that I am the same person I was when I spent 38 years reading depositions and organizing evidence and sitting across from people who thought they could lie on paper and get away with it. I know how to recognize deception. I know how to document it. I know how to build a case that cannot be denied or explained away. I know how to do the work. Martin never understood that about me, even after 40 years of marriage. He saw me as someone who managed the household and raised the children and supported his career. He saw the work I did as clerical rather than analytical. He saw me as someone who processed other people's cases rather than someone who could manage her own. He thought my job had been filing papers. He never understood that my job had been reading people. That blindness, that specific inability to see me clearly, was what allowed me to beat him. If you are watching this, and any part of what I have told you feels familiar, I want you to know something. You are not invisible. You are not declining. You are not confused, and you are not powerless. The person who is underestimating you is making the same mistake Martin made. They are seeing you as less capable than you are because it serves their purposes to see you that way. They are treating your kindness as weakness, your trust as gullibility, your love as blindness. They are wrong. You know more than they think you know. You see more than they think you see. You are capable of more than they think you are capable of, and if they are careless enough to believe their own story about your incompetence, you can use that carelessness against them. The most dangerous thing I ever did was let someone believe I was confused. The most powerful thing I ever did was let them keep believing it long enough to finish my work. Martin left our marriage, but he left on my terms, with my paperwork, on my timeline. That distinction is everything. I spent 40 years building a life with someone who chose to destroy it, but the life I am building now, this quiet, deliberate, completely honest life, belongs entirely to me. No one can take it away because no one else has access to it. No one can lie to me about it because I am the only one living it. The bluebird is back on the windowsill, not because I forgot what happened. Not because I forgave what was unforgivable, but because I decided what that windowsill is for, and it's not for grief, it's for beauty, for memory, for the parts of my life that were real and good and mine. Regardless of how other people chose to treat them later, it's for the life I had and the life I have now and the life I am still choosing to build. If my story has helped you understand something about your own situation, I'm glad. If it has given you courage to pay attention to things you weren't paying attention to before, I'm even more glad. And if it has reminded you that competence is never wasted, that experience matters, that the skills you have developed over a lifetime are tools you can use to protect yourself, then I have accomplished what I wanted to accomplish by telling it. Please like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like it, and share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight, someone who might be feeling invisible or powerless or alone in a situation where they are actually none of those things. You are not alone. You are not powerless, and you are definitely not invisible. You are exactly as competent as you have always been. Yes, that.